Hello, welcome to SIIA Tech Chats. I'm Rihanna Collier, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Brendan McCorkle, who is the CEO of CloudMine. Now, CloudMine provides a connected health platform tailored to healthcare systems, doctors, and patients. Brendan, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want to talk a little bit about wearable tech in healthcare. I mean, you hear so much
Sure.
about it today, and wearables are, they're certainly gaining steam. And I know, CloudMine is a big proponent of digital health. Where is the skepticism for wearables in healthcare, and how do we overcome that?
So there's a couple flavors of the resistance, if you will. I think one of them is that there isn't yet any clinical wearables. So I think this is something that's coming, by the way. But when people think of wearables, they're really anchored on their phone, Fitbit, some sort of fitness watch, very commercial end of the spectrum devices. So I think some of the skepticism is just when you think about, medical devices and you think about wearables, people put them in different buckets in their brain, right? A pacemaker is a totally different weight class than a Fitbit. That might not necessarily be fair, but that's what we do in our head, right? So, if it doesn't cost $600 or $700 and it doesn't come from your doctor, then it can't be medicine. That's one of the trends that's starting to shift actually in the market, where there was actually earlier this year, or maybe it was just before the holidays, so the end of last year, someone caught an AFib, which is a heart irregularity, on a Fitbit. So they went to their doctor, were diagnosed with atrial fibrillation, which can be very dangerous to your health. And the only thing that happened was their commercial wearable was sort of having a hard time getting their heart rate right. So I think we're just starting to see the tip of bringing those two worlds together. And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff as those two come together. I think we will see commercial wearables. I think we will see the insurance companies like Aetna and Independence and others get into making a recommendation of certain wearables versus other ones, maybe subsidizing some of them. Aetna actually just at the beginning of the year is subsidizing iPhone watches for their members because they're showing that tracking, just having the awareness of your steps and your activity is reducing the long-term cost of healthcare. Which is pretty remarkable. So I think those two paths that I talked about, those two buckets are smashing together, and hopefully soon will be one bucket. But that's sort of one of the pieces of skepticism, is that people have separated them as totally different animals, the sort of devices and toys, I'll say a little tongue-in-cheek, right? So as those come together into one, that will help. The other is there's a big security issue. So these things are collecting data, and the data that they're starting to collect is not what movie you watch. It's not, what you bought on Amazon last, although people probably might be a little sensitive about that one. It's actually something like your heart rate now. And as you get into that end of that spectrum, it's now data about you. It's tied into the patient record. And all of a sudden, the perception of need for security and the actual need for security have jumped up a weight class as well. So people are less skeptical in this part of the problem set, but more sort of nervous actually about, okay, well, this is my data. What's it do, right? My Fitbit's collecting my heart rate maybe now, and some activity, and it's pairing with my phone or the computer, and I'm logging. Where does it live? Where does it go? How am I really sure that data is wrapped properly and stored securely? And and some, including Fitbit, there have been some issues. If you remember when Fitbit first launched, this incident was probably 2 years ago now, Rihanna. People could self-report activities on Fitbit, and they were storing the self-reported activities in plain text on their back end. So somebody broke in, which is sort of want to happen, right? As a company gets big like Fitbit or Apple, someone goes to see let me go see what I can find. And they found everybody's username, actual name, and then the activities they were logging. As you can imagine, some of the activities they were logging might not have been entirely above board. And there they were, just sitting there for the internet to see. Incidents like that, that's a big ding or a tarnish on the reputation of the folks at the commercial end of the spectrum. Although to their credit, companies like Fitbit have really taken steps forward. They were very candid about what happened, how they fixed it, that it's not happening again. But that's also part of that sort of smashing together is the mentality of the company who's dealing with patient data starts to change when it's patient data and not just commercial data. I don't think most people care if their Garmin watch leaks where they were hiking. People definitely care if a website leaks their medication history or what's going on with their doctors. Many of us have conditions that maybe we don't want the whole internet to know or be on a billboard on the highway, right? So that's the other sort of half of the equation is almost the responsibility of the stewardship, if you will, of the data that comes along with the generation from the device. I also think that's where the powerful stuff happens in the market, right? So the reward that comes from that risk, we're wrapping a lot of things in the world with this sort of net. Some people call it digital exhaust. Some people call it sort of this device generated data. We're catching things like AFib. We're catching maybe I walk 10,000 steps every day, and all of a sudden I start walking 6,000 steps every day. That could potentially be a delta that triggers something that goes to my physician, and I get a call saying, Brendan, you've walked 10,000 steps plus or minus one every day for the last 9 months, except for the last 3 days. Are you okay? Are you, where's your head at? Are you hurt? Right? Did you stop taking your meds? What's going on? My world, I'd probably be like, work is busy, stop calling. But but as a young man, that's probably okay. But as an older man, potentially that could be a very big deal. Many of us have loved ones, grandparents, parents who have pretty solid routines. They get up and they go to the bathroom once every night. Well, we have the ability and technology to know whether or not they got out of bed. If they didn't, that could be an indicator that something's changed with their health. Maybe if they did more than once, that's another indicator of something with their health. So we're sort of in the digital world we're wrapping all of this noise or that digital exhaust, and we're actually starting to collect it. That's actually the easy part. The hard part is figuring the signal underneath all that noise. And that's what I think is sort of on deck and why people are really excited about wearables. So the folks who aren't scared about that data fidelity or the commercialness or the clinicalness, if you will, of the devices, is that we're finally actually casting the net well enough to collect all that information. That seems like a easy first step, but it's not actually, because we're capturing things. We don't even really know what we have to be capturing. Maybe it's temperature, maybe it's activity, maybe it's eye tracking. Who knows what it's going to be for each condition? But somewhere buried in there, we have what I call like the check engine light in your car, right? The check engine light turns on well before the engine starts to smoke, well before the car sets on fire or stops, right? You have a warning. I was a paramedic for a few years back in the day. We do too. We just aren't listening to what, we don't actually have like a little sign that goes on in the movies. It would be like, a little halo behind us would change color. Okay, we have to go to the doctor. We're not there yet, but we are actually starting to capture that set of information about us as a patient that includes that early warning. So we're going to be able to tell one day, and I always sort of say this, and this is not scientific whatsoever, but I have a feeling it's going to be something like a slight increase in temperature or a slight decrease in blood pressure or swelling in your ankle. There's going to be something like that. That's the 2 days before you have a heart attack sign. That's the check engine light comes on. And maybe it's not 2 days. Maybe it's only 20 minutes, right? But before you're actually starting to have the attack, your body knows something is off. Doesn't do a terribly good job about telling us that something is going wrong in all situations. And I know a little bit more about heart stuff because I was a paramedic. But women, for example, when women have heart attacks, they don't have the things that men do, this crushing chest pain, this pain down the arm, this very iconic, most of us could say, even from the movies, just be like, that guy right there is definitely having a heart attack right now. Women have a heart attack, they say, I don't really feel right now. Did you not sleep enough? Did you eat something funny? Right? Like there's no
they don't listen to their body
sign, right? So there's definitely something inside that is saying, hey, this is happening. It's just not getting out, and so that's what I'm excited about, is that we'll capture it And it's not just the cardiac disease states, Rihanna. There's going to be something like that pathway for diabetes or early detection of diabetes. There's going to be something like that for CHF. There's going to be something like that for, issues with your eye. If you can start detecting whether or not somebody is straining on focusing, maybe you start catching some degenerative eye conditions, right? My mom has some of those, for example, right? There's definitely things that, we're starting to show. Things are starting to not work as well as they should be, or we start to do something differently than we normally do. That is that early warning. And if you're capturing all of the things, your activity, where your eye tracking, your temperature, you're also capturing the changes in them, which could be that warning sign. And that's going to be, to me, sort of this next wave that we've just started, which is, okay, now that we have it, this giant set of data, probably most of which is irrelevant if you're looking at one particular disease state, let's go look for the noise or the signal rather. And when we find that signal, that's going to then potentially trigger or cement that wave into clinical wearables, because we may now know, oh, okay, hey, you have, I mentioned CHF, you have CHF. The thing that tells me that you're about to have a problem when you have CHF is swelling in your ankle. Again, I'm making this stuff up. This is not medical, clinical information, but maybe you need to have an anklet, I guess you'd call it, a bracelet on your ankle, an anklet that is testing relative changes in the swelling of your ankle. And that would be something that you would get prescribed by the doctor if you were high risk for CHF, and you wouldn't need to do any of the other things. It would pair with your phone, and when it started to swell, your doctor would get an alert that maybe you need to come in and check blood work or medication levels or what have you. So that sort of, those two I see converging in the next couple of years of figuring out what the signal is and then the delivery or the capture of that signal. And I think that those two together will be what cements having clinical wearables as a thing. And back to your original question, very long answer to the original question. I think that's going to be the thing that really starts to erode the skepticism or the trust of the system, is when we actually have, you're getting this bracelet and it's from a brand, it's from a Siemens or a GE or a Philips, and your doctor wrote your prescription for a condition that's not scary or new, and that sort of keeps it in, it's safer, if you will.
Certainly an exciting space to watch. I want to talk a little bit about CloudMind, though. You guys recently partnered with Validic, who provide a health data platform. Can you talk about the significance of this partnership and how it's going to advance patient-generated health data?
Yes. So there's a very common misperception in the market that most of the companies that you would call health IT are all doing the same thing. And I think the culprit here is the word interoperability. We all think that interoperability is sort of a very important piece of what's going on, but all of the companies in this space are sort of tackling slightly different pieces of the puzzle. So at CloudMind, we started with sort of the storage and what we call governance of the data, which is really tackling the security, the compliance, the access, the transmission of data. And that puts us as sort of a hub in the middle. You take a company like Validic, who is pooling together as many wearables as they can, and they're trying to provide a way to aggregate really all device-generated data down into one point. That's a very powerful thing for CloudMind, as we want the ability for our users to build digital health applications and be able to consume any of the universe of wearable devices or connected health devices. Now, Validic's business is to take all of the variation in that world and put it together as one point for us. So we can ingest Validic, if you will, and all of a sudden we're giving all of our users the 1,000 devices that Validic has. And for us, we just have to deal with the one Validic pipe. So it keeps it very easy for our technology team. And for any user of Validic, that's a very big piece of their value proposition. Now, if you flip that around, Validic is in the business of connectivity and pipes, if you will. And we find ourselves using this water analogy a lot. They're in the business of pipes, but they don't have a basin for the water to go, so that they can't do anything with it, right? So CloudMind is sort of the basin, if you will, in its most simple form. And I always sort of offend some of our team members when I talk about it this simply, because they're like, yeah, we do so much more than that, Brendan, stop it. But the storage of healthcare data is not a small thing, and it's not a small problem. And all of these other ancillary companies, and I don't belittle them by calling them the ancillary, I just sort of put the hub in the middle and the spokes are on the wheel. They can't function without the hub in the middle actually out acting as a routing layer. So there are companies like Validic that consider themselves the source of device-generated data. There are companies like Redox, which we just announced a partnership with, consider themselves to be system-generated data. So these are the EHRs, the EMRs, other, electronic systems, patient record and other inside the hospital, but sort of coming from software as opposed to coming from hardware. And then companies like Human API, which are trying to wrap all of the patient-generated data. And a lot of times people lump wearables and patient-generated data together, but think of this more as surveys and actually entering your activities into Fitbit, the stuff that we say about our healthcare as sort of patient-generated data. All of those together make up us, the digital patient, and all of the exhaust that we're throwing out. And all of those companies have some pressure to build into what Cloudmine is doing, and they're using Cloudmine as something that allows them to focus on what they're good at, which is aggregating all of the sources of systems, devices, or people, I guess, for us as the patient-generated data. And then they can actually take the piece of the storage and the routing and the governance, if you will, of it, let Cloudmine do that, and then the four of us sit in the middle representing really a complete solution for all of the flow of healthcare data, which is pretty cool. So it sounds sort of simple, it all sort of comes back to data storage and governance for Cloudmine, and that sort of allows us to be used as a system of record for patient data. This also blurs a little bit of a line with the EMRs, right? So people say, okay, so you're like Epic, you're like Cerner. Not exactly. We see that the center of gravity of patient data is moving outside of the hospital. So your doctor may use Epic. If you have children, your pediatrician may use Cerner at a different facility. You have access to some of the data of your kids, but they're in different systems, and you have different access to the data of your kids and yourself. Something needs to be a little bit of an arbiter in between there. And there's sort of two ways to do this. One way is to use a middleware-based solution like Cloudmine, which sort of sits in the middle and is that sort of clearinghouse or DMZ, if you will, where there can be an independent party in the middle that can take data from one party and the other party and only share it out if you're allowed to. So there's a little bit of a identity or truth going on of, are you actually Rihanna, or what if someone spells your name without an H? Okay, that might still be you, right? That might be the data from your physician, but there was a typo in your name. So there's a little bit of matching the data to make sure that it's you, and that if it's the physician, we're sure that it's the physician before that we share their information with you. And maybe we shut off that access because they don't need to have the access all of the time, only when they need to go look for it. But you need to have sort of this persistent access because it's your data. The other way to do it, some folks are pushing into using blockchain technology, and there's a thought that the blockchain technology will remove the ability, or the requirement rather, of having a persisted data set in the middle, because you're tracking all of the transactions sort of in a distributed manner. And I think that may be where things are going, Rihanna, but I don't think we're there yet. So I think that blockchain is definitely a piece of technology in healthcare that's going to disrupt a lot of things. But we don't think at Cloudmine, and a lot of our customers don't think that it's baked enough to be a swap in for an EMR, or it's going to be the underlying pipes for the healthcare system in the next couple of years. We're trying to build a strong independent software company. I think we'll be here for more than a few years, so we obviously have our eye on it. If it's the next wave, we have to make sure we know how it plays in our world and our customers' worlds. So for us, so far, all of our customers, our investors, our partners, it's something that everyone wants to talk about right now, like a lot, but it's not something that people are doing a lot with right now. Where I think it gets really cool, and I think it aligns up with what we're doing at Cloudmine, is that one of the pieces of the underlying technology of the blockchain is that they have the ability to regenerate keys based on partial information. So they sort of think of all of the parts of the data include the ability to build back out to the complete set. You know how sensitive everyone is about their healthcare data. Now imagine if you had the ability to say, hey, we have the highest fidelity system possible, because if something happens in transmission with this data and we lose 80%, sorry, that was your medical record. We lost 80% of it. But instead of, sorry, that file is corrupted, we can actually regrow that 80% back. And now we have your record back. That's pretty cool. And I think that plays really well with healthcare just because of how sensitive people are about their data, right? And the other piece of the blockchain that I think is really exciting is this concept of auditability is so important in healthcare. So, in order for apps to get FDA approved, if they're actually classified as a device, you need to actually show the ability to audit all of the transactions in the states of data that go through your platform, which is not a trivial technology task. So that logging and auditability piece is like half of what the technology is. So if you think the block of the blockchain is the transaction, and usually it's in finance right now. You bought a thing, and the chain is the log of all of it's the audit of all of the pieces of communication behind it. So there is sort of baked into the very foundation of the technology this auditability and logging capability, which is really important for FDA approval. It's very important for getting HIPAA compliance. So there's definitely, it hits two really big nerves in health IT, but we're still really only using the blockchain for financial transactions. And even in that world, who has the head start, I think the banks are only just, there's 2017, the big companies who at some point you need to embrace a technology shift like this are just starting to roll things out this year. So my bet, if you turn the screws on me, is that healthcare would be a year or two behind. So if we're 2017 now, maybe I can put this sort of, since we're recording, I can put my crystal ball. We're probably 2 years out from seeing real blockchain applications of any sort of a critical mass. And that will start to chip, maybe fast forward another year or two after that for a more mainstream adoption. So probably President or Vice President Biden did the cancer moonshot. Maybe that lines up pretty well. Maybe 2020 to dovetail on that is when we'd really start seeing people embracing it. It still feels like people are trying to figure out what the hell it even means.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. We certainly hear a lot about that. I do want to, before I let you go, I want to get your advice for our viewers. You mentioned the importance of being HIPAA compliant, and we know that is certainly important in healthcare IT space.
Absolutely.
What advice can you give entrepreneurs who want to build a HIPAA compliant app today?
Sure. So there's a couple things at the highest level. One, we've had a lot of success with how we think about compliance and security as two different things. So startups have a way about them, an ethos or a swagger, if you will, where there's a little bit of this beg, borrow, or steal mentality. So one of the pieces of advice I would give is be very, very careful following the startup ethos of beg, borrow, steal when you get into healthcare, because some of these regulations are actually for serious. They are not messing around when it comes with messing with people's healthcare data. So now, that doesn't mean stay away. I think there's an overwhelming amount of opportunity, and regulated industries are a little more defensible than unregulated industries. When there's more risk, there's more reward. But there's more risk than some other industries. And so I think that it should give everyone pause. And part of my advice is it's one of the only places in entrepreneurship where I would say, like, follow your gut and take that pause and think about how you're approaching it before, wildly foraging into the unknown and figuring it out later. Healthcare IT is probably one of the areas where you shouldn't figure it out later. You should have at least a little bit of an approach first. First, sort of appreciate that the compliance hurdles are high. Now, a lot of people think that compliance is a competitive advantage, right? So if we're the only middleware solution that is HIPAA compliant, like we have this really compelling solution. Okay, yes to all of those things. But when you start selling into healthcare specifically, you make it your only market, that's not a competitive advantage anymore. It's table stakes. So that's the other piece, is to put the appropriate weight on each end of that equation. You should get HIPAA compliant. You should be skeptical about your providers. I'll even throw us under the bus. Like, ask questions of your provider, Cloud9 or otherwise, right? Be sure that you're comfortable with how they're handling your data. Amazon says they're HIPAA compliant. That doesn't mean you are. So really appreciate how the flow of the data goes, which part you're okay with, which part you have to own, and which part your vendors can own. And then the other side of that, and I think this has been a little bit of a balm to that raw nerve, is if you think about it as a security problem, not as a compliance problem, that helps. A lot of the compliance documents and policies were written. I mean, HIPAA itself wasn't written with smartphones in mind. We didn't have them like we do now. So they set the law in stone. You fast forward 2 years, now everyone has an iPhone, probably iPhone 4 or so at the time. And we're all off to the races and the law's not, right? So that they haven't amended it significantly since then. So there are requirements that don't really match the reality, and the market is just off to the races with wearables and phones and always connected devices. But if you think about it as a security company as opposed to a compliance offering, you're concerned about making sure that the data is safe. Where is it stored? How is it encrypted? What happens if somebody gets to it? Do you have logging and auditability, right? Some small subset of that is required in compliance, but not all of it, and not pushing that envelope and taking care of it as well as you can. All of this stuff is about trust, Rihanna. So especially as a small company, any vertical, startups have a trust problem. You go to a big customer and they say, who are you, right? It's no one got fired for using Oracle, right? It's that fight of evangelizing your product. Maybe you're defining a market segment, so you're evangelizing your market segment and then convincing somebody that they're going to do an MSA with a company that might have 3 people who've never, who aren't even 30 years old yet. So, all right, how are you going to get across all of those 3 checkboxes? And then on top of it, you throw something like finance data or healthcare data. So that's, magnify all of that 10x. So one of the ways to do that is to bake in that you can get a little bit of subject matter expertise by playing out ahead of where the compliance goalposts are. So if you're going to security conferences and you're trying to break your own technology, and you get a little bit of credibility from all of that. And I think like any other startup, you have to believe in what you're doing, and you have to be comfortable in how you're handling healthcare data. Because if you're nervous and you go and you're talking to a hospital, they will definitely be able to smell if you're nervous. So, educate yourself on how compliance really works. Educate yourself on your vendors. There's a lot of mixed messaging in the market about who's HIPAA compliant and who's left holding the bag if something breaks. And I think that's the majority of it. But it is exciting. I would not warn anyone away from this space. I actually think, if anything, the health IT space is going to get more opportunity in the next 2 to 5 years. So there's a lot of things teed up, including a whole new wave of technology, if we're right about Bitcoin, or rather the blockchain, coming into healthcare for real. Maybe there's even 2 waves of technology in healthcare IT ahead of us, and this is an industry that moves pretty slowly, and it's being forced into digital, which means there's lots of creaking, there's lots of gaps in the process, and that's where companies can go and sit and fill in one of those gaps and win a big company's hearts and minds and get a seat at the table for figuring out what to do next. And that's how small companies become medium companies and then bigger. So I think there's lots of opportunity. Maybe the last thing is, I tell everybody, not even in healthcare IT, pay attention to the market. Healthcare, they use different words than non-healthcare. So I think there's probably the highest risk of coming in with, as an idea person, and I'm going to change the world. And then they're going to say, we don't care about changing the world. We have a very specific pain, and you're not telling me exactly what I need to hear to soothe that pain, but we have this pain. Those are the meetings that, if you're listening, are pull your product roadmap into what the market's really saying. So listen to what your customers say. Pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies, insurance companies, they're all in healthcare. They all use different words. They all have different pain points. They all need different kinds of software. And I think people will get trapped by trying to take the same story to all 3 of those flavors of healthcare. But if they're patient and they listen to what the other side is, I think there's lots of little, and little in healthcare. I mean, the U.S. healthcare industry is something like the 6th largest GDP, if it were a country rather. little is actually pretty monumentally big in this world. So there's lots of little pieces of opportunity that can create, millions or hundreds of millions of revenue if people are patient enough to listen and delight their customers. So, like any startup, pay attention to the market. They're the ones who know more than us. We need a little more humility, maybe, is what I'm getting at. The customers know what they want. We're supposed to deliver it, not tell them what they want.
I think that's great advice. Brendan, thank you so much for your time and insights today. For more information on CloudMine and SIIA, please visit our websites and stay tuned for next week's Tech Chat. Brendan, thank you.